Okay, everyone, welcome to our latest episode of An Englishman, an Irishman, and a Load of Bollocks. I'm Dave, I'm the Englishman, and I am talking as ever to Paul, who is the Irishman. And together, Paul, are you ready to talk a load of bollocks?
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah, let's talk good bollocks for today.
Let's talk good bollocks. Let's talk good bollocks. So it's the start of the weekend. Have you got any plans, Paul?
It's probably starting out as a downer. I'm actually going to have a quiet weekend. I think I was saying to you off camera, I'm planning to do John O'Groats to Land's End in 2 weeks with my oldest boy, Dylan, who's 7. So I'm just laying low. I'm just finalising a few little bits regarding that. We're doing it via public transport. So just getting a few bits, just double checking buses and trains, but everything is booked and hopefully it will run smooth. But sure, if it doesn't run smooth, that's also part of the fun. So quiet weekend. How about yourself?
Yeah, that sounds like a brilliant trip, that, Paul. I'm very envious. Yeah, sounds amazing what you've got in the pipeline there. Yeah, I think similar to you. I think a quiet weekend, really. Maybe a bit of gardening, because the knee's feeling a bit better now, so I can do some gardening. So it's always good. Some walks, but I am looking forward to, or am I looking forward to it, or is it actually a sense of trepidation? I'm going to the Everton game on Monday night, Paul. We're playing Spurs. So I've managed to get a ticket for that. So I'm really, well, I was going to say again, I'm looking forward to it. It's a mixture of excitement and trepidation, but it'll be an experience, I'm sure. So that's on Monday evening. So
remember what Alex Ferguson said at half time when they were losing to Spurs? Lads, it's only Spurs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But I feel I can't say anything though, being an Everton fan.
Spurs will be saying, lads, it's only Everton.
It's only Everton. Exactly. So I've got that planned anyway. But yeah, so we thought, didn't we, Paul, that we would carry on the theme of comedy. So for those of you for those of you who are listening that didn't catch our last podcast, we talked around comedy, why comedy is important, the state of comedy in 2023, the demise of comedy, and the importance of comedy and humour in taking on tyrants, destabilising their regimes, and ultimately proving to be their undoing as well. So if you've not listened to that, it was quite a good discussion, wasn't it, Paul? We both enjoyed it. So that's do click the link. Now, in terms of where you can listen to the podcast as well, we're on Spotify, we're on Google, and we're on Apple. So if you're watching this on YouTube or wherever you're listening to it, we'll put all the links for everywhere else that you can access it to. We'll put those links on there as well. So hopefully that might enable more people to listen to An Englishman, an Irishman, and a Load of Bollocks, which is obviously what we want. So yeah, comedy. I think we were going to talk specifics today, weren't we, Paul? We were going to talk specific comedies, which ones we love, and celebrate some of the characters, and then maybe theorize on how they would have viewed the COVID madness as well. I'll leave it up to you to
it's definitely going to be a light-hearted one, a bit tongue-in-cheek. Everything is, it's all very subjective. Yeah, we're going to talk about maybe The Office, Fawlty Towers, One Foot in the Grave, The Royal Family, The Inbetweeners, and possibly Only Fools and Horses if we've got time. So which comedy do you want to kick off with, Dave?
Well, Fawlty Towers came to mind there, but just before we get into the actual discussing the sitcoms themselves, it just came to me then that both of our countries, let's say the UK, actually the UK and Ireland, are known around the world for their comedy, aren't they? And I was just wondering then, why is that? What is it about our particular brand of comedy that is so loved around the world? I mean, I think I can probably safely say that both of our countries have always culturally punched above their weight in terms of compared to the population. But is it the irony? Is it the sarcasm? Is it the black humor, the gallows humor that kind of we all engage in everyday life in that type of humor, don't they? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's all of that, all of what you said, especially sarcasm and dark humor. I would say, as well, as an Irishman, the British do the best comedy in the world, hands, without any competition. You think of some of the comedies that we mentioned already. I was even thinking, I mentioned the royal family. I think they tried to bring the royal family to America, and the Americans didn't get it. They were like, this isn't funny. They're just sitting there. They didn't get it, did they? Yeah. So British humor it's very unique, and it's intelligent humor as well. It's very subtle as well.
Yeah, I think it's very subtle, and I think there's a real genius in being able to. For example, the royal family and The Office are two that come to mind, in being able to celebrate or make funny the mundaneness of life. That's the royal family as a comedy created around a group of people sitting around watching the TV, but it's absolutely enthralling. And The Office, which a lot of people can identify with. I'm saying this, I'm looking out the patio door and Diamond is absolutely destroying the veg patch here. I might have to go out in a minute and get him in. And the Office, which a lot of people can relate to, is obviously the mundaneness of working in an office environment. And it's so relatable. But I think there's a real genius in being able to create comedy out of that kind of like inertia, really, everyday life. Paul, give me 1 second. I'm just going to try and get the dog in. 1 sec. Diamond, no, come on. I'm going to have to bribe him in with some food now. Hold on.
Dude, just take your time.
I'll be 1 second. You can carry on talking if you want.
Well, I was thinking, we were thinking of... we're going to go through each comedy, weren't we? And you mentioned Fawlty Towers, and that's one of the great comedies, isn't it? Fawlty Towers, and I suppose it brilliantly played. I'm just talking about Fawlty Towers there, Dave. As you're, is he sorted, the dog?
I bribed him in with some food. Yeah. He's created a bit of a mess out there.
The funny thing is, as I'm talking, my kids are kicking off in the background as well. So there's something, But Fawlty Towers, one of the great comedies, isn't it? And what I loved about Fawlty Towers is that it brilliantly played on stereotypes, didn't it? And you can't do that now. You can't play stereotypes now. Like, for instance, you had the lazy Irish builder, played by the wonderful David Kelly. You had the Germans. You remember when Basil, the Germans said, "You started this," and he said, "No, I didn't. You invaded Poland." Classic. You had the obnoxious and loud Yank with his Waldorf salad. And I love Fawlty Towers. But we talked about how would Fawlty Towers and Basil and co have got on during COVID, and I visualize Basil running around the hotel in a panic regarding COVID rules for hotels. You can just imagine health and safety officers coming to the hotel, and him and Manuel in a panic, and just Sybil, his wife, in the background drinking wine, chilled and laid back, not caring the world. And then I was thinking as well, regarding Fawlty Towers, regarding COVID, was I loved Major, and all joking aside, there was a sadness to Major because he was the old army man. He was obviously serving the war, but he had onset dementia, didn't he? And you could just imagine Major during COVID, where he would have been hugging and kissing, people who were staying in the hotel. And Basil, sorry, I've got Molly coming in now. Come on, Molly, come in. I got my nearly 2-year-old now.
Well, you've got Molly coming in. Sorry to interrupt, and I've now got Diamond.
Okay.
He was creating a ruckus in the living room, so I love to see what he was doing. And he's actually tearing apart. He's tearing apart a Labour manifesto that's been posted through the letterbox. So good on you, Diamond.
Good boy. Good boy. Good boy.
Yeah.
But look, what are we saying about Major? Yeah, you can imagine him like kissing and hugging the people staying in the hotel, and Basil going up to Major saying, "You can't do that. The virus is here," and Major getting all confused and saying, "The virus? What virus?" And you can just imagine how it would pan out. And so Fawlty Towers was one of the greats, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that is it really did play on stereotypes, and the stereotype that it played on the most was the stereotype of the you know, that old colonial type of a Little Englander, you know, kind of a British Empire psyche that was obviously embodied by John Cleese's Basil Fawlty, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, I think here's a good barometer for if somebody understands comedy or gets comedy or not. Anybody who watches Fawlty Towers and sees and sees a racist thread through it, rather than the self-deprecating nature of Englishness, doesn't understand comedy, because the scenes with the Germans, that famous or infamous episode, and the scenes with Major with all of his old school prejudices. The aim of it isn't to showcase racism. The aim of it is to make fun of those old kind of like attitudes, you know, and that's the genius of Fawlty Towers. I think as well, you know, John Cleese is Basil Fawlty, absolutely chaotic character, and as you say, to imagine the mayhem in Fawlty Towers as he tries to impose some kind of rules. Manuel would be confusing things, wouldn't he, with the language barrier? Major stumbling around, half pissed, you know, as you say, people, and you'd have Polly in the background, wouldn't you, trying to get? She'd be the one who'd be just trying.
She was the organizer,
the organizer with the common sense head on, just trying to make
okay.
We were wondering, weren't we, Paul, which characters in these sitcoms that we're going to discuss today would have seen through the utter bullshit? Which ones would have dived in and read first? Which ones would have?
I was thinking of that. I was thinking again. I'll talk about Only Fools and Horses now, because again, that's Only Fools and Horses is probably the greatest of them all. You know, that ran for about 10 years, and it's, you know, I think Only Fools and Horses, it's timeless, and there's so many iconic moments. And I have memories watching as a child. But as you say, which character would have saw through the bullshit? I think Del Boy would. And Del Boy was if you want to call it, the comedy archetype. He was the dreamer, wasn't he? The lovable rogue.
Yeah.
But in many ways, he was, but also he was shrewd and streetwise. You know, he was a London geezer. And I don't think Del Boy would have complied at all, Dave. You know, as I said, he was a working class geezer. He always had a healthy, and I mentioned previous videos from my own childhood, he had a healthy skepticism and mistrust, and in many ways a disrespect for the government, for authority, and for the old bill, as he would call them. And he didn't like being told what to do. You know, so you can imagine Del Boy talking in his local community in Peckham, talking in the nag's head with the locals about the COVID bullshit, talking down at his market stall. You know, so I think he would have seen through it very easy. But like any good businessman, Del Boy, you know, what did they say? Never waste a good crisis. Del Boy would have been selling masks 2 for $5. He probably would have been selling the Light newspaper, which is a free newspaper, for £2 as well. And don't you know, you could probably get a fake COVID cert out of Del Boy. So he would have played the game when he wanted it, but also he would have seen through the bullshit. But I also think then his brother Rodney, I think, was different. You know, he was ideological, wasn't he? He was a bit more gullible, a bit more susceptible. If you want to say susceptible to mass formation, you know, I think Rodney was probably a lefty as well. He was into all the green agenda stuff. Yeah. And what was very common, Rodney was very conscious what others think of him. You know, well, Del Boy wasn't. You know, so I think the two brothers would have been at loggerheads with each other regarding COVID.
I agree, actually. I agree there, Paul. Yeah, I think Del had a big heart as well, didn't he? Really cared. Really cared about his family. He was a protector as well.
He was.
The genius behind Only Fools and Horses was an analysis really of family life, albeit a very dysfunctional family, but aren't all families dysfunctional, I suppose. An unusual one in that all three of them were male, Del, Rodney, and Grandad, then Del, Rodney, and Uncle Albert. Yeah. But I think you're right. I think Rodney, you mentioned he was ideologically possessed. Actually, he came across as the opposite to Del in his worldview, really. Whereas Del was he was a product of almost like the Only Fools and Horses ran through that Thatcherite era. Del liked that. The entrepreneurialism, small state. Rodney, one of the themes in Only Fools and Horses was Rodney's frequent comments on the environment and on
Yeah.
environmentalism.
And he kind of hung around with yuppies, didn't he, Rodney?
Yeah, and he was definitely what we would probably term a lefty, but like a lefty back in the 80s and 90s.
In the good sense.
It wasn't like a lefty is today, completely ideologically possessed. But I think he would have been probably hypnotized by the propaganda. Yeah. I think Del would have seen through it, but made some money out of it. And I think Uncle Albert as well. I think he would have thought a load of bollocks during the war. We dealt with, during the war. He would have seen through it. He would have seen through that generation, Paul. This is the thing, you see, is that my grandparents, they would have seen through it. They would have. There's a reason. There's a reason why they sprung this. When they did.
Well, you mentioned in the last video about that generation, you mentioned now I wouldn't be the biggest fan of the comedy, but I used to watch it. Victor Meldrew, One Foot in the Grave. Yeah. And he was that, again, if you comedy archetypes, he played the archetype of the grumpy old man. And he played it brilliantly, Richard Wilson. But the thing is, he wasn't grumpy at all. Well, he was a little, but he was a realist, wasn't he? He was brutally honest. And as you said, there was a sadness where he was frustrated with the world around him. He was frustrated with things. And he couldn't hold it in. He said it as it was. And you can imagine his famous quote of, "I don't believe it." He would have been saying that regarding masks, regarding lockdowns, regarding jabs. "I just don't believe it," in his unique English voice. And he could see through the bullshit, And I think there was another famous quote with Victor Meldrew where he said, I think it was to his wife, "I may be moaning all the time, but I'm always right." And there's a bit of truth in that. I can't argue with that.
Yeah. Again, these characters in these comedies, I mean, One Foot in the Grave has some truly dark moments. Yeah. It really does.
And he died from a hit and run, didn't he?
Yeah, the ending of it is it really, really is.
It is dark.
I think the genius behind One Foot in the Grave is how it intertwines. We talked about it in the last podcast. Those twin and polar opposite concepts of tragedy and humor that define life. It does it perfectly, and also the genius behind it is how. I can't remember the writer. Is his name David Renwick or something like that? His plot, how he punches up those plots. I've got no idea. They are absolutely bizarre. Things that happen to Victor Meldrew. Yeah. It's representative of he sees the absolute madness in everyday life. And then he's created this character, Victor Meldrew, and he's put Victor Meldrew through the ringer because Victor Meldrew, if there is a tragedy to befall someone during the day, it'll happen to Victor Meldrew. It always does. But despite everything that happens to him, in every day of his life, he always tries to do the right thing. Yeah. He doesn't do what he's told to do. He really just does what he thinks is the morally right thing to do. Yeah. And
there was a toughness to him, wasn't there?
Yeah, and a toughness, but also a softness and a vulnerability as well. Yeah. And all these concepts are key in developing comedic characters.
He was a tortured soul, wasn't he, Dave? Sorry for interrupting. He was a tortured soul because he was just frustrated with things around him, and sometimes his frustration would come out in the wrong way. But I think another comedy as well that I think they would have seen through the bullshit, and it's definitely one of my favorite comedies. Actually, it is my favorite comedy. Is The Royle Family, And actually, one good thing of these comedies, it's a sign of a good comedy, is their theme music is brilliant. Like I love it's Oasis, isn't it? Half the World Away.
Yeah.
The opening music for Oasis or the opening music for The Royle Family is brilliant. And then also you look at the cast. Like you talked about funny Liverpool men, Ricky Tomlinson. You had the late great Caroline Aherne, who was a bit of a genius. Sue Johnson. Yeah. Sue Johnson, and I think who played Nana? Liz Smith, and then Twiggy, whoever played Twiggy, and he was in Keeping Up Appearances. What a great cast! But the Royle Family were, like, in many ways, Dave, like a kind of like a good snapshot of what a good close family is. That they celebrate all of life's family moments. And that, as I said, they were close knit family. They chatted together. They drank together, they smoked together, didn't they? They laughed, they argued, they cried together, and they even sang together. You know the way Jim would whip out the old banjo.
Yeah.
They were kind of a salt, as I said, they spent a lot of time together. They were that classic salt of the earth, working class Northern English family. You know, they were good neighbours as well. You know, one of the good neighbours to Joe and Mary and Cheryl, and they were also good to the elderly. You know, as much as Nana used to wind them up and annoy them over the remote control or things like that, and her and Jim would have run-ins. They loved her, and he loved her. So they looked after their granny, they looked after their grandparents. So that's why I think with the whole COVID thing, they would have seen through the bullshit, you know, because they talked as a family, didn't they? You know, you can imagine Jim's responses. My arse am I taking that jab? But as I said, they were skeptical and cynical of things, I imagine, you know, and I think of Denise as well, albeit she'd be the lazy type. She was savvy as well. You know, she was savvy. She was streetwise. There was no bullshit with her. But unfortunately, her husband, Dave, was your classic. Nice guy, Dave. Dave, I'm talking about Dave in the royal family here. He was kind of a nice guy, wasn't he? He was a do-gooder. You know, he worked hard, and he was a family man, but he was a classic normie. You know, he was the kind of the classic, you know, go along to get along type. And then you had Anthony as well. I'm just thinking of the character. You had Anthony there as well, who, the thing about Anthony is, he went off to London. He kind of bettered himself, but he might have had notions about himself. But I'm sure when he go back to, it was based in Manchester. So when you go back to Manchester, I'm sure the family would put him into place. But I love the Royal Family. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful comedy. And I said it's very subtle and it's very clever. And what a great cast and writing from it.
And it was groundbreaking as well, wasn't it? It was absolutely, totally, completely new, and it spawned a few other similar type comedies that were nowhere near as good. But I think, do you know what interests me about the Royal Family and The Office, right? Both made around the same time, late 90s, early 2000s. You know, they speak of, I think they kind of reflect their age, you know, because they were the dying embers of kind of like the pinnacle of Western public life and Western culture in the 90s and early 2000s. That was when things were beginning to die off. And it's almost like you can feel through those comedies, they're almost kind of like symbolic of the time, because with how sedate they are and how the characters are in such inertia, kind of like there's this almost like this sense of lethargy. It's almost representative of what society was like maybe at that time, as it was sleepwalking into where we've ultimately ended up now. Really, like what's next? We'll just sit right. Times were good. Things were easy. We're struggling, so people were just sitting around and letting life. Maybe quite bored a lot of the time, just small talk, going to work, sitting in front of the TV, and all while in the background, these dark forces were gathering. I just think that, but in terms of the actual comedy,
that's a good point, actually. And also, when you mentioned The Office there as well, as you said, it was kind of corporate world. People working in offices,
meaningless jobs, filling in spreadsheets.
They were paper merchant office, weren't they? It was very mediocre and irrelevant.
And I think at that time as well, under the the new Labour government, if they were good at one thing, it was creating a load of bullshit jobs. Someone wrote a book actually called Bullshit Jobs, and there's a lot of, I'm just going off on a bit of a tangent here. There's a lot There's a lot of polls that come out actually about people's jobs, and they consistently reveal that most people think they actually do have a bullshit job or a meaningless job. and I think most people, most people don't get that real job satisfaction, and I think that was what The Office was getting at. It was commenting on that. It was commenting on maybe the lack of, I don't know, the lack of ingenuity, the lack of job, the lack of, I don't know, satisfaction maybe in society.
You could see like in Tim was an interesting character in The Office because he was absolutely distraught. There was low self-esteem. You could see it on his face, low self-worth.
His life was going nowhere,
His life was going nowhere, and you could see it. He was frustrated, and the thing is, he didn't have motivation either, and he was stuck in a rut. And that's the thing about The Office was it was as much as Brent was the Joker, wasn't he? The happy, likable idiot, but he was also insufferable. But there was also kind of interesting characters like Dawn and Tim. You know, and Garrett was an interesting character as well. But you can imagine what Brent would have been like during COVID. He would have loved it. He would be all about protect the NHS. He would have fanfare, and the local media probably would have went to The Office, picturing them getting the jab. Garrett Keenan would have loved COVID because he was a Hitler type figure, wasn't he? Jackboots and all. He would have loved the power, the authority. And he would have snitched on everyone in the office, wouldn't he, if they were breaking the COVID rules? But then again, Tim and Dawn would have mocked him and sneered at him and would have broken his heart regarding taking the piss. You know, they'll be playing probably pranks on him as well. But you think of the Garrett types, you know, you could just imagine what he'd be like regarding COVID. And we all know a Garrett type in our life. You know,
we all know the power.
You would have loved the power and the authority regarding COVID. But ultimately, Dave, fellas like that they had a good run at it, but they're left behind now. You know, they're isolated, they're angry, and they're confused. I also even think of another character I used to love in The Office was, remember Finchy, Chris Finch?
Yeah.
He used to go, Finchy! And Brent would try to be all, you know, because he was a man of the man. The Redmeister. But you can imagine Chris Finch, if Brent was wearing a mask, he'd be like, what are you wearing that bloody mask for? Take it off, you sap. You know, you can just imagine Chris Finch. I don't know who played Chris Finch, but he was a good character.
He was a good character, and he was the characters in The Office, again, something that was groundbreaking at the time, wasn't it? Like a documentary in an office.
It was, yeah.
And you think about it, you think, just how can anybody make that interesting? But then you think, having worked in an office myself, you think of all the storylines and the things that actually go on, you know, in offices. They're far from boring. The work might be boring, but the things that go on, and I think it's
the cheesy boss.
It's really, really, really clever. How the writers of these comedies are able to reflect through their comedy life at the time, society at the time, the people at the time.
Ricky Gervais is very good at that, to be fair.
Well, he is.
With all his comedies, he's generally a few steps ahead, you know.
Well, I think Afterlife as well. I don't know whether you've seen that. I think that's
I've seen it. Yeah.
I think Derek's really good as well. I think some of the characters in there are really
there's a sadness to his comedies as well, you know. But generally,
there's got to be sadness to comedy, otherwise it's not comedy. You know, that I truly do believe that when something's permanently funny, it ceases to be funny at all. It's got to be comedy's got to be juxtaposed with darkness and tragedy. It really does. Otherwise, it's like you can't have light without dark. You know, you've got to have that undercurrent of tragedy to the comedy and an undercurrent of comedy to the tragedy, and together, if done right, if thought through creatively, and with the right actors and the right plot, with the right lines, it can work like an absolute dream, like it does. I mean, Victor Meldrew's comedy timing, absolutely superb. We were talking about our favourite comedians as well, weren't we, last week? And we mentioned Ben. When it comes to timing, is everything in comedy. To tell a joke, it's all in the timing, isn't it? You know? So
and I think a comedy that is none of the above, which you've said, that's kind of nearly a genre in itself. And I know you love it. It's the Inbetweeners.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I love it. Although the only thing I'd say about the Inbetweeners is both of the films, they went a step too far, because the films were a bit of a disappointment, particularly the second one. But because the first film, all four of the lads ended up with the girls that they wanted. That wouldn't have happened. That wasn't who they were. That would not have happened. They got that wrong. But in terms of the three series, and you mentioned last week, some of the best comedies are only very short-lived in nature. The Inbetweeners, there was only 18 episodes. Perfect. Absolutely very short, 20, 30-minute episodes, only 18 of them. Absolutely hilarious, because again, so relatable. That is what sixth form is like. that's what it's like, isn't it? It's exactly like that, you know. And I think everybody's got a bit of each of the characters maybe in themselves, and also they can remember who was the Jay, they can remember who was the Will, they can remember who was the Simon, they can remember who was the Neil in their school when they were in sixth form as well. It's just so highly relatable.
It is. It's very highly relatable. Yes, spot on. And there's no pretense, is there, with the Inbetweeners? It is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, and even me and Lisa, we always enjoy watching the Inbetweeners. You know, and it's in a nutshell, it's just hormonal adolescence getting up to mischief, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the things they say. It's the things they say. You know, the lines that Jay comes out with. It's hilarious. Absolutely.
I was thinking of the characters. Like I said last week, like Jay's father. I always found Jay's father very funny. As I said, he doesn't sugarcoat. And you can imagine Jay's father saying to him, like, "What are you wearing that bloody mask for, you pansy?" You can imagine him saying that to Jay.
Yeah.
You know, but I like Jay. There was a softness to Jay. He was all bravado, but there was a sadness to him, wasn't there, Jay?
Well, we all know that that blagger, don't we? You know, the blagger at school who was always giving it the big I am, telling the ridiculous stories. You know, a bit of a dreamer, I guess. But underneath all of that, a real vulnerability and an insecurity.
Huge,
and that's Jay.
Huge.
Whereas Neil, the total opposite. You definitely wouldn't call him the most intellectual of characters. And that
happy, carefree guy, wasn't he?
Happy, carefree, yeah, content. And because of that, he was the most successful with the girls at the school.
Yeah, and he had a job when he left school. The others weren't working. He was clever. But even if you want to talk about COVID related to the Inbetweeners, let's talk about Jay. You know, Jay would have been the type. He wouldn't have given a shit because his father would have been pushing him to say, "Don't give. There's no bloody virus." But I was thinking, someone like Jay sums up a lot of young people regarding COVID, where a lot of young people didn't give a shit about COVID. They knew it was bullshit, but because they wanted to go traveling and they wanted to go to pubs and nightclubs, they got the bloody vaccine for that reason. And Jay would have done it for that reason. And a lot of young people did it for that reason. And especially in Ireland, we had the vaccine passports where young people couldn't get into nightclubs. And then there was talk of you can't leave the country. So, you know, in many ways, Jay would have been, I think he would have been that type of guy. And in many ways, the government played those guys. But then Will, I never liked Will. He was a real posh wanker. He was he was condescending, wasn't he? He looked down at people. And you know what he would have been like during COVID, Dave? He would have been there. I trust the experts. I trust the science.
Yeah.
You know, and then if Jay or Simon said anything to them, he said, "Oh, you're an expert now. Yeah. Where's your medical degree?" He would have been that classic guy. But then he would have been, did you see like Piers Morgan? He would have been like Piers Morgan. Now that the truth is coming out, you know, he can't admit he's wrong. He's got so much pride. But I was just thinking of an Inbetweeners quote. I remember Jay saying to Will, he said, "Just because you have a posh accent doesn't mean you're intelligent." And that sums up well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It really does. And it's something else about comedies as well is that it's often the most profound lines are delivered by the fool. It's like Baldric in Blackadder or Trigger in Only Fools and Horses. Says something, it just makes you go, wow. The fool always delivers the purest truths. And it's because it's so rare that they will say anything that's not absolutely ridiculous. And when they do say something, and it is just the purest cutting truth. And that's the whole point of the fool, isn't it? And
they're observing things, aren't they?
What's that?
They're quietly observing things all the time. They're taking it all in.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, Baldric in Blackadder, particularly Blackadder Goes Forth in the trench, says one or two things that make the viewer really kind of wow. It really does hit home. We've got just under 4 minutes to go, Paul. So I think I've really enjoyed actually this more light-hearted discussion in the last around comedy. Because we need to remember, don't we, that we need to laugh. If ever there was a time to find the humour and to laugh, it's now, isn't it? And to give ourselves permission to laugh, you know?
Yeah. Sorry, Dave, sorry.
No, and I was going to say, if that means rewatching old sitcoms back when comedy was good to do it, then absolutely, because I'll never get bored of
No,
Fools and
no,
Horses and Fawlty.
no,
I just
no,
never will. And I
no.
noticed another facet to good comedy is how multi-layered they are. The Office is exceptionally multi-layered.
Oh, yeah.
You notice new things each time you watch it. Genius. Absolute
But
genius.
you're 100% right. And you look at, like, do you remember Little Britain? Little Britain was funny with the sketches, and they cowered, didn't they? They cowered. The two guys with Little Britain, the wimps and cowards that they are. They had a great piece of work with Little Britain, and they cowered to the mob. And I don't think you can see Little Britain now. But yeah, it's wonderful that we can rewatch these classic comedies. You know, I was only talking about off camera, Rob C. Nesbitt. You know, that was just classic Scottish humor.
Yeah.
And James, I love Jamesy from Rob C. Nesbitt. You know, you can imagine what the two of them would have been like during COVID. You know, with the pubs being closed, and it's life is for living, and yeah, we can't get too serious either. You know, it's good to have a joke and a laugh, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Humor is we've got to preserve comedy, haven't we? Because we talked last week, didn't we, about how tyrants in their quest to destroy culture, they start with comedy, really, I think, because if you can remove the population's ability to mock them, then you remove their most likely chance of dethroning them. So I'm hoping for a bit of a renaissance in comedy over the next few years. We've got a minute and a half left, Paul. So just wanted to say I really enjoyed that chat. Thanks to everybody for listening. As ever, please share the podcast, tell people about it, leave us a comment wherever you watch or listen to this. Anything from you, Paul, for the last, got 1 minute to go?
No, just enjoy the weekend, everyone. And we'll chat soon. Thanks again, Dave, as always.
All right. Cheers, Paul. Well, you have a great weekend. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Hope you all have a great weekend. And we'll be back. We'll be back when we're back. Whenever we feel like doing another podcast, then we'll do another podcast, won't we? All right,
no
then.
time.
Cheers, Paul. And thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.